They promised to sell my best friend their home, then tried to steal it out from under them after the owner died. So I turned $1 million open house into a total disaster and made the rich regret ever crossing us.
My name's Jake Callahan. I grew up in East Portland, Oregon, and I've always been the kind of guy who watches out for his people. You know, loyalty over everything. I'm not rich, I'm not famous, but I take pride in doing what's right, even if I have to get a little creative to do it. What I'm about to share with you happened around 15 years ago, and to this day, it remains one of the proudest, most righteous, and downright savage things I've ever done. At the heart of this story are two of my closest friends, Emily and her husband, Trevor Malloy. These two are the salt of the earth. High school sweethearts, married young, 5 kids, and somehow still madly in love. Life was never easy for them, especially not in a city like Portland, where rents were already getting out of hand even back then. But they never complained. They just hustled, saved, and kept that big, beautiful family of theirs together. They were renting this rundown 4-bedroom house in the northeast suburbs for about $400 a week. Doesn't sound too bad, right? But I kid you not, that place was a horror show. The kitchen looked like it hadn't been touched since Nixon was in office. The drains reeked of death, and the roof leaked just enough to keep things interesting during the winter. But still, it was all they could afford, and they made it work with what they had. The owner of the place was this sweet old lady named Mrs. Langford. She was seriously wealthy, owned a bunch of properties around the city, but had a heart of gold, especially for Emily. She adored her, and when Emily mentioned they were dreaming of buying the house one day, Mrs. Langford told him she'd make it happen. No need for realtors or bidding wars. Just save up, and when they were ready, she'd sell it to them at the market value they discussed, which back then was doable. To make it easier, she even froze the rent for 5 straight years. 5 years. That's how long Emily and Trevor scrimped, budgeted, and sacrificed every indulgence to put money aside. They passed up vacations, lived with second-hand furniture, and even took on side gigs when they could. Finally, they hit their savings goal. I remember the day they told me. We had beers in my backyard, and Emily was tearing up. They were ready to go to the bank and make their dream official. 2 days later, everything changed. Mrs. Langford passed away, just like that, peacefully, in her sleep. But she hadn't put anything in writing. No contract, no agreement, just a verbal promise and a shared understanding. And legally, that means jack. Now, her 4 adult kids inherited her estate, the Langford siblings. I'd heard of them before. Real high society types, rich, spoiled, and about as warm as a tax audit. We're talking old money, private schools, country clubs, and vacation homes in Aspen. When they first reached out to Emily and Trevor, they assured them the deal would still go through, but they'd have to wait until probate wrapped up. Emily and Trevor were a little wary, but hey, these folks are rich. What did they care about one modest house? They figured it'd all work out. In fact, they were so sure, they even started fixing the place up. Trevor pulled down all the grimy wallpaper. Emily painted the living room this cheerful teal color, and they started dreaming big again. Probate took months, but eventually the estate settled. That's when the Langfords called and said, "Okay, let's move forward. Submit your loan application, and we'll get the paperwork started." Emily and Trevor were ecstatic. They'd already met with the bank months before and gotten pre-approved. But then the hammer dropped. The loan was rejected. Turns out the Langford siblings had secretly jacked up the asking price by $80,000. No heads up, no warning, just a cold, calculated move. Now the house was heading to the open market. There was going to be an open house in 7 days, and the odds were high it would sell to someone else. Portland's housing market was on fire back then, and 4-bedroom homes were vanishing like toilet paper in a snowstorm. My friends were devastated. They were this close to finally owning a home. 5 years of planning and sacrifice gone in the flash of greed. If the house got sold, they wouldn't just lose the deal, they'd lose their home. Rents had exploded, and with 5 kids, finding another affordable 4-bedroom rental was near impossible. Now, I'm not one to get emotional easily, but watching them that night, sitting on their floor with their heads in their hands, broke something inside me. And that's when I got angry. I'm talking seething, blood-boiling, righteous fury. Because the Langfords didn't need the money. Not even close. Splitting that extra $80K 4 ways, that's peanuts to people like them. They were trying to squeeze a struggling family just because they could. And I wasn't about to let that happen. So I started plotting. I dove into real estate forums, watched videos from realtors, read blogs on how to stage a home for sale. And then I flipped it. What could make a house less desirable during an open house? It was time to make this place look like every buyer's worst nightmare. But we had to be subtle. The last thing we wanted was to make Emily and Trevor look like bad tenants. No, we had to walk a fine line. Keep the damage invisible, but the vibe off. Real off. First, the layout. Realtors always talk about making a space feel big and airy, so we did the opposite. We moved every piece of furniture away from the walls, shoved in some borrowed bulky chairs, and hung up Trevor's collection of old motorcycle memorabilia. That living room went from cozy to cluttered in 5 minutes flat. Next, the smell. This was the fun part. Emily, bless her, spent hours boiling cabbage on the stove. Meanwhile, I sprayed ammonia, heavily, around the front and back doors. It stunk like a feral cat colony had taken up residence. For good measure, Trevor and I cracked a dozen rotten eggs into the drain system and let the sewer gas do its thing. It was foul. And then came the neighborhood.
We talked to Bill, the neighbor across the street, and asked if we could dump an old moldy couch in his front yard for a few days. Bill's a legend. Not only did he say yes, he even threw an old busted fridge next to it for aesthetic. The place looked straight up post-apocalyptic. But we weren't done yet. We called every friend we had who drove a loud car or bike and begged them to do laps around the block during the open house. Muscle cars, rattling trucks, modified Hondas with fart can mufflers. That street sounded like a NASCAR pregame show. And it didn't stop there. I had one more ace up my sleeve, the Rivertown Rugby Club. Now, I've been playing with those guys since I was 22. We're a rough bunch, not exactly the kind of team you'd bring to a tea party, but we're family. I put the word out in the group chat. Free barbecue, cheap beer, and a mission. Within hours, I had more than a dozen of the biggest, scruffiest guys you've ever seen ready to roll up on game day. My buddy Tank, not his real name, but no one calls him anything else, rode in with a pack of bikers dressed like extras from Sons of Anarchy. They parked their Harleys right out front of the house next door, where our friend Pete, another neighbor, had set up a full BBQ station in his front yard. Pete was slinging burgers, the guys were tossing back beers, and music was blasting from a dusty old boombox. It was a beautiful, chaotic symphony of controlled disorder. Then came open house day. I stood across the street pretending to check my phone, but really, I was watching every single moment. The realtor pulled up first. Pristine little Audi, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my car. She looked around with visible concern. The street was crawling with noise, people, and what could only be described as vibrant local flavor. The first couple showed up at 10:05 a.m., middle-aged, polite, dressed like they shopped at Pottery Barn. They barely made it past the porch. Emily answered the door with a smile, let them in, and I watched as they entered and exited again about 90 seconds later. One was holding their nose. The second group? Same thing. This time, the guy took a step back as if something hit him in the face. He literally gagged on the scent of stewed cabbage, ammonia, and whatever cocktail had brewed in the drain pipes overnight. I swear the smell had become a living thing. If I had $1 for every person who turned around without even finishing the tour, I could have bought the house myself. Then came the bold one. This young guy in a suit, maybe late 20s, clearly a solo investor, walks up like he's immune to the madness. He strolls into the open house while the rugby guys cheer from across the street. I couldn't hear everything, but I could see him looking around, suspicious but curious. He was the only one who lasted more than 5 minutes. I saw him step out and look toward the party next door. That's when Mickey, one of our biggest guys, think human mountain in a leather vest, walked up and struck up a casual conversation. I later heard the exchange went something like this. Investor guy, "This is your place?" Mickey, "Nah, we just hang around here, usually every other weekend, morning after the real party's up the block." Investor guy, "You guys do this often?" Mickey, "Only when we're not drag racing or fixing our hogs. You hear about the sewage problems here? The roots mess with the pipes, stinks up the whole block when it's hot." The guy's face turned 3 shades paler, and he slowly backed off like he just stepped into a war zone. I saw him shake hands with the realtor, smile politely, and drive away. No offer, nothing. Just gone. By the end of the day, not a single offer came in, except one. Emily and Trevor put in their official offer at the original price Mrs. Langford had agreed to. No more, no less. They even had the deposit ready and signed the paperwork that same afternoon. The Langford siblings were furious. And how do I know that? Because the next morning, the realtor called them to inform them that one brave buyer had called to offer $30,000 more than Emily and Trevor. The Langfords were ready to jump at it until the realtor told them the sale had already been signed, sealed, and legally binding. See, the law in our state had gotten stricter about gazumping after a bunch of lawsuits in the early 2000s. Once a signed offer was accepted and the deposit cleared, there was no backing out. The Langfords couldn't raise the price, cancel the deal, or accept a higher offer. It was done. I can only imagine their faces when they realized they'd been beaten fair and square by a bunch of average folks in a street full of loud motorcycles, questionable smells, and rowdy rugby players. Emily and Trevor moved forward with the sale, locked in their mortgage, and finally became homeowners. They went back to fixing up the place properly this time. No more pretending. No more holding back. I remember helping them install a brand new sink in the kitchen. We celebrated by eating Chinese takeout on the floor, just like we used to when we were broke 20-somethings. It felt poetic. And for those of you thinking, well, they had cheap rent for years, so maybe they didn't deserve sympathy, let me stop you right there. Rent in 2004 at $400 wasn't a gift. It was just average. And even if they'd had a deal, that deal came from a promise, from trust. And breaking that trust just because someone dies doesn't make it right. What the Langfords did was legal. But what we did, that was justice.
Sometimes, in a world where the little guy always seems to lose, you've got to get your hands dirty. You've got to outsmart the wolves in Kashmir and protect your own. I didn't burn down a house or smash any windows, but I made damn sure nobody else would want to live there long enough to steal it out from under my friends. And even now, 15 years later, every time I pass by that little house with the blue front door and the new kitchen window, I smile, because I know that on that one day, good people won. And the villains? They didn't even see it coming. Life settled back into its rhythm after that, but the aftershocks of what happened lasted for months, and I'll admit, I relished every second of it. The Langfords tried to put up a fight at first. They even had their lawyer send a few aggressive letters, insinuating that the sale had been coerced, or that some kind of fraud had taken place. But their own signatures were on the documents, and the deposit had cleared through official channels. Every T was crossed, every I dotted. The law didn't give two hoots about how unhappy they were. And while they sulked in their gated communities and looked for someone to blame, Emily and Trevor got to work turning that house into a real home. It was like watching color return to a black and white movie. For 5 years they'd lived with their lives on hold, waiting, saving, hoping. Now they were living. Trevor rebuilt the kitchen almost from scratch, with help from YouTube and a couple of hand-me-down tools from my dad's old shed. Emily started a little vegetable garden in the back where the weeds used to grow wild. The kids, they finally got to paint their own rooms, pick posters, and decorate without worrying whether they'd have to leave it all behind. They were finally putting down roots. I was over there every other weekend, helping patch up drywall or lay down laminate. And during those long afternoons with sweat on our brows and laughter in the air, Emily would often bring up how close they came to losing it all. "Jake," she'd say, handing me a cold beer, "I still can't believe what you pulled off. You saved our future." But here's the thing. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a man doing what needed to be done. Because if folks like the Langfords were going to use their wealth and influence to squeeze the working class dry, then someone needed to be the wrench in their machine. Someone needed to throw them off their axis. And in this story, that someone was me. Now, word about what happened started spreading through our community. At first, it was whispers. Then a few neighbors came up and asked, "Did you really call a biker gang to crash the open house? Or was it true you used cabbage and ammonia to fake a sewage problem?" I never admitted to anything out loud. I just smiled. But let me tell you, those smiles were contagious. Before long, it turned into legend. People started referring to it as the house party hustle or the Langford shutdown. I heard some guy at the grocery store retelling the whole saga with flourishes I hadn't even added, like we'd hired a mariachi band or let raccoons loose in the attic. Completely false, of course, but hey, the myth was doing good work. And the best part? Other landlords started behaving better. I know it sounds far-fetched, but in the months after the Langford mess, I started hearing stories about landlords freezing rent for tenants in good standing, or giving them first rights to buy when they sold. It's like that one small act of resistance rippled out. People took notice. People remembered. The Langford siblings, meanwhile, took the loss personally. I know this because one of their cousins, a guy named Bradley, who used to work as a financial advisor downtown, ran into me at a bar. He was already 3 whiskeys deep, loosening up with each round. "You're the guy, aren't you?" he said, slurring just a little. "What guy?" "The guy who torpedoed that property deal on Clifton Street. They're still pissed about it, man. One of them called you white trash Batman." He laughed so hard he almost fell off his bar stool. "White trash Batman," I repeated, smirking. "That's got a ring to it." We clinked glasses, and I took it as a badge of honor. I didn't do it for recognition, but knowing that I'd managed to tilt the playing field even just a little was enough. Because in this country, in this economy, too many people are drowning, while a handful sip champagne on yachts, oblivious to the rest of us. But not on my watch. Years passed. The kids got older, Emily went back to school to become a nurse, and Trevor eventually started his own handyman business. He even hired a few of the younger guys from the rugby club who needed work. Their family thrived. And the house? It blossomed. New siding, a fresh coat of paint, a little white picket fence out front. It looked nothing like the rotting shack they'd moved into a decade earlier. I still drive by sometimes and just smile. One day I was helping Trevor install a new ceiling fan when he asked me, "You ever think about what would have happened if we didn't fight back?" I paused, because I had thought about it. They'd have lost the house, moved into some cramped 2-bedroom apartment, maybe split the kids between relatives for a while, maybe left the city altogether, chased cheaper rent across the state line and started over from scratch. That kind of stress changes people. It breaks families. But we didn't let that happen, because sometimes doing the right thing means not playing by the rules, especially when the game is rigged. Sometimes the best thing you can do is grab the playbook, tear it up, and write your own ending. And that's what we did. I never set out to be a hero. I didn't grow up thinking I'd be some kind of crusader for justice, especially not over real estate and roast cabbage. But life has a funny way of handing you these moments, crossroads where you either look the other way or step in and do something.
That house on Clifton Street, that was one of those moments. After the dust settled and the Langfords went back to whatever glass towers they spent their days in, life carried on. But I'll tell you something real. It carried on a little bit better for all of us.
Emily and Trevor never took what happened for granted. They knew exactly how close they came to losing everything. That brush with eviction and betrayal, it changed them. It made them fiercer, more focused. I saw it in how they talked to their kids, how they tackled every new home project, how they kept track of every penny in their budget. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were thriving, living life on their terms. Every family barbecue at their place became a celebration not just of birthdays or holidays, but of making it. We'd raise a glass and laugh about the Great Cabbage Conspiracy. And the kids, now teenagers, would roll their eyes and beg us to stop telling the story again. But they always listened, because deep down, they knew that story was their origin story too. Even little things changed. Remember Pete from next door, the one with the barbecue during the open house? He and his wife had been living under threat of eviction for months. But after seeing what happened with Emily and Trevor, they decided to stand their ground too, got a lawyer, negotiated a rent control agreement. Boom, secure housing, just like that. Tank and Mickey, the biker rugby duo, they started a handyman and landscaping business together. Rough and ready property pros, complete with a skull logo and surprisingly good Yelp reviews. Turns out looking intimidating and being good with a hedge trimmer is a winning combo. And me? Well, I went back to my day job, warehouse logistics. Nothing glamorous, but it pays the bills and lets me sleep at night. And now and then someone will ask me, "Hey, you're Jake, right? That guy from the Langford story." And I'll just smile and say, "Yeah, that was me." Because I won't lie, there's a certain kind of satisfaction that comes from doing something not just clever, but right. Not legal vengeance, not violent retaliation, just a well-executed, creative middle finger to a system that too often forgets the little guy. There was one more cherry on top, though. About 3 years after the sale closed, Emily got a certified letter in the mail. It was from a legal firm representing the Langford estate. I was there when she opened it. We were all gathered for her oldest son's birthday, a big backyard affair with balloons, cornhole, and burgers on the grill. She read it aloud, her face twisting from confusion to disbelief. Apparently, the Langfords were being audited. Something about undeclared capital gains, an under-the-table real estate shuffle involving other properties in the same neighborhood. And get this, the IRS wanted to verify the sale price of the Clifton Street house. They were trying to claim a higher sale value on paper to offset another loss. Emily's signed paperwork with the original agreed-upon price contradicted their records. In other words, our little revenge not only cost them a higher sale, they couldn't even lie about it later. "I guess karma keeps receipts," Emily muttered, sliding the letter back into the envelope. We all burst out laughing. There's a lesson in all of this, one that I think more people need to hear. In a world where big money talks loud, where handshakes don't mean much anymore, and where good folks get steamrolled just for trusting someone's word, you've got to fight smart. You've got to be cunning. You've got to outthink the greedy, not just outshout them. Revenge doesn't always come in the form of slashed tires or broken windows. Sometimes it's cabbage. Sometimes it's a crowd of burly men in biker jackets. Sometimes it's an entire community pulling together like gears in a machine, running just long enough to jam the system. And sometimes revenge is just giving your friends their life back. Now, I know there are people out there who'll say, "Well, what you did wasn't exactly moral." Maybe not. But if morality means letting rich bullies trample over working families without a fight, then maybe we need to rewrite the rule book. I didn't do it for applause. I didn't do it for headlines. I did it because at that moment, someone had to. I still keep in touch with Emily and Trevor all the time. Their kids are graduating high school now. One wants to be a paramedic. Another's talking about joining the Air Force. That house, the same one that nearly slipped through their fingers, is filled with dreams, memories, laughter, and everything a family home should be. And every time I hear their story retold, on Reddit, in podcasts, or even as internet folklore, I grin,
because they never know the full version. They don't know the names, the smells, the chaos we created with purpose, but I do. And now, so do you. So if you ever find yourself up against people with deep pockets and shallow hearts, remember this story. Remember that one small act of courage, one brilliant plan, one loud, stinking, biker-fueled open house can change everything. Because revenge isn't always about getting even. Sometimes it's about getting justice. And justice, well, sometimes it smells like cabbage.
If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like, subscribe for more, and share it with someone who'd appreciate it. Thanks for watching.